Welcome to the Self-Defense Warrior Podcast, where our hosts, Jeffrey Wilson and Pat Militich, probe the minds of experts from a vast spectrum of knowledge on how to best prepare for the inevitable emergency situation to come. Jeffrey and Pat in the Self-Defense Warrior Podcast are your insurance policy moving forward. And now, here they are, the hosts of the Self-Defense Warrior Podcast, Jeffrey Wilson and Pat Militich.
All right, to our faithful listeners, one more episode of Self-Defense Warriors kicking off. And we've got a really, really cool guest today. Very, very interesting cat. And Jeff, real quick, we talk about this asymmetrical self-defense, this mindset for modern man, and food is certainly one of the very ever-present items that we must secure and must have to remain independent and free. And so the guest that we're going to have on today, and you've talked about this a lot. You've probably talked about it even more than I have in the past, but it's going to be a fun episode nonetheless, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. His work is absolutely, like he was saying beforehand, half tongue in cheek. It's game changing. It's going to change the world. The permaculture and like what we've talked about, trying to get self-sufficient, building communities that are self-sufficient, because, without all of the other things, you can have as many, storable food or whatever you want. Your health is really the foundation of it all. If you're not around, if you're not healthy enough to be around, none of it else matters. You can't enjoy your freedoms and your family, et cetera. But it starts with the food, the soil, the air, the water, and we're going to get into it today.
Yeah. Yes, we are. And so the coolest thing is knowing that our guest is a former national champion wrestler, which automatically you gotta like the guy. He's got great work ethic. Four-time All-American to boot, freestyle Greco Minnesota State wrestling champion. To be versatile in folk style, freestyle, and Greco, that's a trifecta not many can say that they've been able to do. And a guy that's successful in the real estate world. His company had, I believe, profits of about 1.5 billion with a B dollars. So very successful guy, and about a decade and a half or so ago went full force into the permaculture world and teaching people how to grow food forests. And his website is foodforestabundance.com. Jim Gale, thank you for jumping on with us, buddy.
Well, it's an honor to be here, Pat and Jeff, and I'm very thankful to be sharing this message of freedom with as many people as I possibly can. And this message is so freaking real. What I'm going to share today is not a hypothetical solution to all of the world's biggest problems. It's a demonstrable solution to all of the world's biggest problems. And I'm talking about mass extinction and deforestation and cancer and diabetes and heart disease and hunger and tyranny. This solves it all.
It does. So tell us your transition from that world of business and real estate and everything like that. You made a ton of money and you just kind of decided to check out for a while, right?
I did. I was in the mortgage industry and I loved it at the beginning because my goal was to make money because I was broke. I got done traveling the world. I lived in Africa with the Maasai and a bunch of different places. And I needed to make some money. I was 29 going on 30, and it was time for something new in my life. Previous to that, I was a bar manager on Maui, Hawaii for 4 years. And previous to that, I was a college wrestler. So I wrote my goals, and that's so important, as you both know, to create an inspired vision of yourself in the future, and then to work yourself into that vision. The goals were the foundation of my success. And I know for sure Napoleon Hill was right when he said, whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. That's a powerful statement. And I believed that statement. So I said, I have no limits. And so that was, a long time ago, a past life. I got done with the mortgage industry because I started to really feel that this is not the type of industry that I wanted to live in. So I then found permaculture, and that's when my whole world just turned upside down for a while, because the first thing I found was the problems. Permaculture is about solutions, but it helped to expose the problems on such a core level that I've been obsessed with it ever since.
So, Jim, who were your mentors in the permaculture world? Who were the guys that came before you and gave you, kind of handed the mantle over to you?
Oh, the giants, the people. I think Bill Mollison and David Holmgren will be known in the history books of our world, in fact, I'm getting emotional. They will be known as the people who created the kind of the business model. The model business is like so small compared to what permaculture is. And business is, by the way, part of permaculture, right? The voluntary exchange and the ethical exchange of value is the foundation of permaculture. It's ethics. So Bill Mollison, David Holmgren, and then all of the permaculturists around the world, I've watched thousands of hours from all these amazing people who have proven these solutions.
It's so very interesting. Anytime I've noticed you, Jim, you mention the name Bill Mollison, it chokes you up. Especially the quote, "The problems of the world are increasingly complex. The solutions remain embarrassingly simple." And each time I've heard you mention him in that quote, you have to take a second, catch your breath, because obviously he has seriously impacted you and the direction of your life.
Oh my God, his stories. If you're ever bored on a Sunday afternoon or something and you're looking for some wisdom and some inspiration, watch Bill Mollison's Trump story or his whale story or any of his lectures. He's got a way of speaking that is so direct and so engaging and also full of wisdom.
Now, explain the concept of permaculture, and because it is such an amazing world, and people think about gardens and things. I've gardened since I'm thinking probably 12 years old. I had a garden out in my mom's backyard, and I used all the dog shit. We had 4 dogs, and I fertilized it with dog poop and all that sort of stuff, and grew tomatoes and peppers and cucumbers and everything else. And so I've been into the gardening thing, but I wasn't familiar with the permaculture world until the last few years, when a lot of it has exploded, of course, because of things going on in the world.
Yes. Permaculture originally stood for permanent agriculture, and now it's really permanent culture as a holistic way of looking at how our culture is existing. The path that we have been on by design, right? When Henry Kissinger 50 some years ago said, if you want to control nations, control oil. If you want to control people, control food. If you want to control the world, control the world's currency. That wasn't just the ramblings of a madman, because who would talk about controlling the world? A James Bond freaking villain? That was the guy who met with every U.S. president and who appointed Klaus Schwab. So this is a strategy that has been implemented on the people of the world. And of course, it goes back to the Rockefellers and the difference between allopathic and homeopathic medicine. And at the end of the day, everything that we're witnessing right now in our world, all these monocultures and the centralization of the most basic thing that we need decentralized, and that's food, is by design. So in permaculture, we turn the problem into the solution. The problem is centralized, poisonous food. The solution is decentralized, poison-free food.
And really, ultimately, when we look at it, World War III, that's been raging for quite some time, longer than 3 years, of course. But now, everybody's heightened sense of awareness because of, they're turning up the volume on everything. The war literally is taking place at the soil, at the dirt. That's where the war is taking place.
The most destructive part of this war is on our soil. The soil is the immune system of the earth. It's the foundation of health and wellness of everything that we hold dear. And yes, they've been poisoning it and mining it and using monocultures in such a way where, well, it's radically unsustainable and all unsustainable systems fail. And yet, this is what's so amazing is a perennial edible landscape takes less maintenance than a lawn and will provide an absolutely epic amount of food.
So now tell us, you just sent us a video not that long ago of doing a permaculture farm, a food forest at a school. So talk about that. And that's something that should be happening at every school across the country, in my mind.
It sure is. And we make it so logical because right now a school looks at a school garden as a liability from a cash flow point of view. And they look at it as a good educational tool, but other than that, it's kind of a liability. We turn that thought process. We turn these food forests into assets. So we just installed for the Creative Inspiration Journey School in St. Cloud, Florida, a fantastic perennial food forest. Now, this is important because when people think about growing food, they say, I don't want to be a farmer. Growing food is hard. I have a black thumb. I have a brown thumb. All sorts of layers of BS, belief systems, bad science, and bullshit about what it truly means to live in a perennial edible landscape. So we design using the permaculture principles, and we install perennials, which are plants that you plant once, and they will provide for generations, even thousands of years. There are olive trees on the Greek Isle of Crete that have been providing olives to that community for over 2,000 years. So the difference between an annual and a perennial is something that will help everybody see how easy this is for them. If we only took out our ornamentals and our ornamental trees and bushes in our yard and the poisons and replaced those with food producing trees and bushes, if that's the only thing we did, we would radically change the world.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to differentiate between annuals and perennials. I mean, most people do know, but I think as it relates to permaculture, it's important to understand that difference. And if you can't speak to, and you mentioned this, the importance of the design of the food farm and have it mimic nature the best way possible for success, basically.
You nailed it, Jeff. So permaculture starts with mimicking natural systems, observing what is thriving in a natural system, and then modeling after that and finding how to create the type of plant combinations. They're called guilds. A guild is a community of plants that support each other. And when you put a proper guild in place, like on the ground level, you've got comfrey and perennial peanut, and maybe you've got some pigeon pea and some mimosa, and those plants actually create nutrients and nitrogen for the soil. And then they also cover the soil. And then above that, you've got maybe a shorter raspberry bush or blackberry or blueberry. And then you've got maybe a shorter fruit tree. And then maybe you've got an overstory canopy fruit tree all in one area. And maybe you've even got some sweet potatoes, turmeric or ginger or taro or yucca on the base of that. And now in one area the size of one fruit tree, you've got a dozen plants providing food and habitat for whatever season that you have. In Minnesota and North Dakota, it might be 6 months of the year. Here in Florida, of course, it's 12.
Now, also on top of this, you want to be completely sustainable. You want to be able to have potentially wind power, wind to drive your well water up, solar power, water storage, a lot of other things. Is this something that you guys also incorporate into your designs when you meet with a homeowner or a farm owner or somebody similar to that?
Absolutely, Pat. In fact, we learn in permaculture, you're constantly observing and interacting and making small changes and adapting to the environment. So when I started this, I started making fancy greenhouses, and I was off track, but I knew that I would get on track eventually. And when I finally let go of all the fancy shit and just started modeling permaculture, which is building soil, by the way, right? I love the idea in certain circumstances of hydroponics, but in most circumstances, they're not the best return on money. I love the idea of growing food on your roof in 1 out of 10 circumstances, but it's building soil and putting the food in the soil that is the ultimate ROI on every single level. It's the natural way. And one more thing about the educational piece. So, and what you just said is, after the years of really being obsessed with the question, how do we catalyze a shift in awareness that leads to mass adoption of this logical and beneficial thing? And I really have been obsessed about that for 15 years. More recently, I've transitioned to joyful obsession, which was a big difference because it got rid of the scarcity, and now it's just pure fun. So we've taken all of the elements of what we call freedom, and we've put them all into a Freedom Farm Academy. Let's imagine an acre of land where you have all of the food, all of the water, all of the energy needs you need to thrive, not just survive. Permaculture is not about survival. It's about thrival. You've got all of the systems you need, so you never have to leave your property, and you can thrive. And then we add in the components of education and demonstration. And when we turn that homestead into a business model that helps the community also grow food, it's going global fast.
So yeah, talk about the global aspect of this, all the different places around the world that you've gone where these have popped up, where you have helped start these, talk about the different areas of the world and the different types of food that you've got to put in, right?
Yeah. The different types of food will blow people's minds. Most people don't realize how many perennial edible plants there are. In fact, nobody has realized it until lately, because what has happened is the permaculture network and the growers networks around the world have created databases where they share all of the different types of food that you can grow. I've got a buddy in northern Minnesota on the tip of Lake Superior who has 8 or 9 different types of kiwi growing in northern Minnesota. So the types of food is a big deal to stack the layers of food in a food forest. And then what was the other question? I got so excited about the diversity of food.
Well, just all the different locations around the world that you've done this.
So we launched 18 months ago on the High Wire with Del Bigtree. We've served people in now 15 or 16 different countries and almost every U.S. state. We went from 3 people to about 1,300 people around the world, and we're just at the tip of the iceberg. We are now doing a Freedom Farm Academy in Ghana, another at least 1, maybe 2 or 3 in South Africa. We're doing them in Thailand. Very soon it'll be the Philippines and Australia, 2 or 3 in Canada, and then we're popping them up all over the United States.
Yeah, I had that vision. I emailed you because I've lived in that homeowners association cul-de-sac life in America. Americans all want their perfect green lawns and landscaping and all this stuff, and it's always driven me nuts. And I was a guy that recognized early on, do I really want to spray these chemicals in my yard? I don't care if I have a dandelion in my yard or 1,000 of them. They're actually beneficial. But I'm living with around doctors, lawyers, John Deere executives. Of course the John Deere executives are going to have a perfect lawn. But anyway, there were emails that would go out constantly about taking care of your yard and keeping it upbeat. Now, look, it was a well-to-do neighborhood, but the whole vibration of all of it, I just rejected completely. And that's the kind of neighborhood I would love to be able to go in and see you go in and go, you know what? Have a homeowners association and all the people that live in that neighborhood pay you to come in and design backyards for all of them where they're all growing, and they have beautiful, literally it's a garden of Eden in their backyard instead of this just flat grass and a couple of trees.
Yes, and we're demonstrating that model all over. At Galt's Landing, after John Galt from Atlas Shrugged, we are building a community on 52 acres. We have 10 home sites, an average of about 1.1 acres each. The whole place is a paradise. It's a Garden of Eden paradise, and every home site will have its own food, water, and energy needs met on site. And here's the beauty of it. It's infinitely more beautiful than these other landscapes. They might look good, but there's no life in these other landscapes. Our landscape, there's birds and butterflies and lightning bugs. And not only that, but at our HOA, since we don't use our land as a liability, we use it as an asset. We don't share expenses. We share the abundance. It's a complete reversal of the crazy world we have today.
Well, and it's really so crazy, Pat, as you mentioned, they're all over the country, these homeowners associations where they literally double down on how awesomely manicured your lawn is. And I forget the statistics you had said, Jim, but lawns are literally these humongous wastes of space in this country, not only the space, but the amount of chemicals that go into it that then seep into other stuff, the surface waters, et cetera. It's so weird how they would rather look good and poison them than actually, we'll see how receptive they can be to things what you're doing, but it's just weird that these homeowners associations are almost fining people or whatever it is for not having their lawn manicured and chemicaled up and everything like that.
Yep. They get way more receptive when they see a professional landscape design. because that's what we do. We design edible landscapes in a way that's functional relative to the customer, to the zone, and in some cases to the HOA. So we can literally put the same type of size of tree in a particular area where they want a certain size tree. The difference is it will produce food. The same with the bushes. The one thing that HOAs that we have to change, and if anybody listening is in an HOA and you see these little signs in the yard after they poison their freaking lawns, sometimes these signs around here, they're in the shape of a heart. They're a red heart. My daughter wants to go up and grab them because they look pretty. And on the thing, there's a circle with an X out through it. Says, do not touch, no pets, no people, because this is poisonous. And we have to first become aware of that and stop that is number one.
It's almost like the bottles of toothpaste. If you ingest any amount of this, contact the Poison Control Center immediately. They're telling you it's poison, but it's great for your teeth. Something I wanted to ask you about the system and the effectiveness and creating the best scenario for it to succeed. You had mentioned about redundancy of certain systems and how redundancy equals resiliency as far as maintaining this permaculture.
Yes. So in our Galt's Landing, we currently have over 200 different species of food. You name it, it's there probably. Apples and avocados and bananas and pears and peaches and raspberries and blueberries and blackberries and mulberries and elderberries. So diversity is the key to strength in a food forest. Monocrops are the key to destruction. That's when you have a monocrop, you have to bring in the inputs because it's unnatural. And in an unnatural system, you have to prop it up with fake shit. So in food source, the diversity becomes the strength and the resiliency of the system. And the same goes with energy, where you don't just want one type of energy system. We had Hurricane Nicole come in last week and it ripped out one of our solar panels, right? But we have propane, we have fuel tanks, we have a little wind generator, which isn't so much, but it's something. And then we're building our houses to actually suit the environment. So we can plant deciduous trees on the south-facing side of our house. In the winter, they lose the leaves, the sun hits our house, and it heats our house. In the summer, they become shade. So it's infinite what can be done in the permaculture design process, which will mitigate the need for outside energies.
You know, it's been at least, I'm thinking 15 years ago, I was driving through an area of a neighborhood that I lived in at the time. It was along John Deere Road there, Jeff, with Deere Run and all of that sort of stuff over there, whatever. And I drove past a house and it had a fenced-in backyard, and there was nothing but gigantic palm leaves, and it was a jungle. It was literally a jungle. And we're talking, this is Iowa. This is not supposed to happen in Iowa. And so I stopped and I went and I knocked on the guy's door. I said, I've never seen anything like this in Iowa. Can I look at your backyard? And he goes, absolutely, come on in. So he's got a pool back there, and it's literally a jungle. And he's got these massive pots with banana trees and all kinds of stuff growing in his backyard. And every fall, what he would do is he takes a machete, literally lops them off, and carts them into his basement and stores them in the winter. And then he would bring them back out in the spring, and they'd grow again. And he'd do that every single year. So it's pretty cool, just people thinking out of the box like that, just like you, Jim, that, it's 2% of the population that are visionaries, from what I'm told by a good friend of mine in the ag industry, a very, very bright guy who looked at me one day and he said, 2% of the population are visionaries, about 12% are people that will go along with you right away, and then the rest of the population will drag their feet until they see all of the change happening that you're doing. And that's, you're obviously a visionary. So it's cool to just tap into some of your thoughts in your brain.
Well, thank you for exposing these thoughts to the world. This is how we change the world. And we're very strategic about it because we're at war, as you mentioned. And as a military strategy, what I am laying out, what the permaculture world has laid out, is the solution. So then let's start stacking the functions and adding the influence and the influencers and the different ways to integrate. Now, when we bring this to politics, when a politician, and I'm not a fan of government at all, Anarchy is peace. I know that because people don't want to harm each other. So, but the system being what it is, the amount of energy that goes into politics is absolutely nuts. So if a politician would take our campaign strategy and run with it, they would win every ethical seat, because our campaign strategy is about using the people's resources to actually create food abundance in every county, in every city, every state, every country that there's energy going in. Same with the church, right? The church land all over the place. Does the church really want to create the Garden of Eden, or do they want to control? Well, most pastors and parishioners want to create the Garden of Eden. They want to create abundance. So let's invite them in and let's use that church land to create radical abundance for their community. And of course, the same with the schools, the same with the corporations. Everywhere of the 44 million acres of lawn is an opportunity. We're sitting on the biggest opportunity in the history of humanity to create value. And by creating value, we get a yield.
Well, that's what I've always said. The whole think globally, act locally, building these kind of communities is absolutely essential. But as you alluded to, sir, you know, the pharmaceutical industry, the tech industry, the ag industry has their fangs so deep into our system, it seems very difficult to extrapolate oneself from it because they frown on our self-sufficiency. What we're seeing now and what's coming, whatever you want to call it, Agenda 21, the Great Reset, we're going to be seeing restrictions on water, food, soil, energy, etc. So it seems like they're going to be. My larger question is, have you received any resistance from big pharma, big ag, if you will, because this potentially has, to me, like Pat's, what he's doing with soil, it sells itself. If you make the connection between what we eat, our food, and getting sick in the pharmaceutical industry, you would think we would have nothing to do with that and be able to set up one of these permacultures as quickly as possible.
You know, there is layers of belief systems that have been programmed into the minds of society using neurolinguistics and these tools to control. You know, governmente literally means mind control. Goethe said, none are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free.
Yes.
It took me a while to get that through my thick skull. When I finally realized that these taxes that we're paying, they're unconstitutional, they are slave taxes by the threat of force and violence. I have to pay an entity that I'm literally at war with, when the solution to government is so simple. It's a free mind. It's enlightenment, not enlightenment where I can turn water into wine. No, not enlightenment that defies the laws of physics. No, simply a mind free of programming. That's all enlightenment is to me. Or that's not all. That's a big deal. Enlightenment is a free mind. With a free mind, which starts with faith and courage, by the way. This, for me, has been epically important. I had fear for many years when I saw what was going on in our world and I didn't know how to solve the problem. When I finally let go of the fear, I took a breath, I was walking. I remember the second, it was like lightning struck, where I said, I was at the end of my rope. I was done. I was so distraught because I had went from $0 to $20 million down to negative $80,000 in pursuit of this freaking idea whose time has come, right? Like Victor Hugo said, there's one thing stronger than all of the armies of the world, and that is an idea whose time has come. It struck me like a freaking lightning bolt. The idea is enlightenment. It's a free mind. It's faith and courage. And then from there, the miraculous synchronicities that are coming every day, I'm in awe every single day. And then from there, it's how do we use our resources and our energy wisely? And then from there, we do permaculture.
Now you had to, I mean, there had to be many times that, and I'm sure it probably happens now and then today, where you literally felt like you were on an island, like nobody was listening. Nobody, I mean, that's the way I felt for years in a lot of things that, and Jeff has felt the same way, you know, where we were talking about, hey, this is what's coming. You might want to pay attention. And over and over and over again, eventually they would reveal that what we were saying was true. And it was just, and Jeff and I have, of course, you know, the whole tinfoil hat thing and all of that, you know, all the people that are asleep saying those sort of things. But in my conversations with agronomists and horticulturalists and chemists and scientists and doctors, not being educated about organics and all the power that organics have. And
You've been listening to the Self-Defense Warrior Podcast with Jeffrey Wilson and Pat Miletich. Watch the complete interview on Red Voice Media Premium using the link below, completely uncensored and ad-free. Not a member yet? Try it for $1.